Welcome to Leadr Podcast, the ultimate destination for MedTech insights, leadership inspiration, and the latest innovations. I'm Stephanie Plea, founder of Tribe Agency and your host for Leadr Podcast. Welcome to episode 5 of Leadr Podcast. I'm so excited about today's guest speaker, Drue DeAngelis. I am thrilled to introduce him. He's got 35 plus years of experience in the MedTech industry. He's also the founder of the DeAngelis Group, and he's the guy to call if you have an executive search need. That all being said, we discuss hot topics in our industry like hiring freezes, meritocracy, how to break into the industry, and a ton of other topics. So let's get into it. I'm super excited to welcome my next guest on Leadr Podcast, someone that I've known for a very long time. Drue DeAngelis is serving as our 5th guest speaker today. And we were just engaged in a pre-call conversation. And I said, I've got to start the recording because all of the conversation that we've had leading up to this has been valuable. And I want to make sure it's included. So we were just talking about the topic of breaking into this MedTech industry. And he was referring to the fact that he gets asked often how to break into the industry. And I was saying the same thing. And we both have our opinions about it, but Drue, you were in the middle of a sentence and I cut you off so I could record this. What were you saying?
No, first, Steph, thanks for having me. It's so fun to reconnect after 24 years almost.
I know.
Yeah,
you just told everyone how old I was. Thank you for that.
But yeah, okay. One of us looks our age, the other doesn't.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, it's true. When you're in the device industry, you have all kinds of people who think it looks more glamorous. And they think that the income is probably better. In many cases it is. So you'll get that attraction and people want, and so they know you're in it. So they'll refer their friends. And so I get a lot of calls from people who want to break into the device industry. And so it's something that happens so frequently that these kids, and it's a lot nowadays, it's kids of people who are in the industry and they're trying to help their kids out. And so I wrote just a little ebook just so I could, not spend 15 minutes on the phone with them, just to say, hey, here's an ebook. And it's the story I would tell you anyway. So here it is. And I give it to them. And it's free. So it's
how did I not know this? This is brilliant.
I don't know.
I'm going to start sending people to the ebook because it saves me a lot of time. You need to send it to me. Right. I'll put it, in fact, to the listeners, I will put it in the captions of the YouTube video as well as the Apple podcast, Drue's ebook, if you're interested.
It's not a verbal ebook. It's the old school ebook that's like a PDF. So anyhow,
you're so old school that you don't understand. I can link a PDF to a link.
Oh, wow.
Later conversation.
Okay. So there's those. And I do say, hey, if you're brand new, if you're breaking in, you're young, there's ways in. There's how I got in, and I got in through somebody I saw who was a distributor for Zimmer back in the glory days in the 80s. And so I was fresh out of college. He was trying to recruit me. And then finally, when I wanted to actually take him up on the offer, he pulled the rug out. So I went around and he referred me to somebody who ended up hiring me. So fresh out of college, I did that, but not today. It's just really hard to do that.
It's brutal.
So I'll send somebody to ebook, but also, as we were just talking about, is send them to medical sales college, because you get enough training on especially the orthopedic industry, spine or biologics or foot and ankle or extremities, to where a company looking to hire an entry-level sales rep can say, okay, well, at least I know you're proficient in the anatomy, the physiology, the technique, and how to stand in the OR and not contaminate the field. So there's great value in that. It takes a commitment. It's not cheap, but I know of a lot of companies that hire them, and as long as you have somebody who's managing them, and really their training isn't complete, it's just the basics.
It's just the entry. Yeah. So I was telling you, I sent my nephew Gannon to medical sales college, and to his dissatisfaction. So he came to me, like you were just describing, all the family members, see these crazy careers in medical, and they think, oh, I want to be like my aunt, or I want to be like my uncle, or I want to follow in my dad's footsteps. And then they think they can just, by having a degree, get into this field. And yeah, if you want to go the pharmaceutical route, I think you can probably get hired right out of college. And even Intuitive had people that they hired right out of college, but they were in very junior associate type roles where you're essentially just covering cases. And so without any experience straight out of college, I think your best move, honestly, and I don't get paid for promoting this, neither does Drue, but maybe we both should. Medical sales college, I think, is a good outlet. And I had told Gannon, I said, I know you just graduated UCSB. The last thing you want to do is go back to school. But if you want any kind of street credit, plus they have, last I checked, this was years ago, they had like a 90% placement right out of medical sales college. And that's pretty high. So you're
Very,
almost guaranteed a
yeah,
job. Now, it's up to you how you do in those jobs and how you prevail. But ultimately, to get your foot in the door, if you don't want to start with the pharmaceutical path, I wouldn't recommend. I would not recommend. I would, take that or Drue's ebook. Okay.
yeah,
So I think the other thing we were just touching on is just the climate of hiring right now, not just in medical sales, but all over. And since you are a recruiter, what do you think's going on? I mean, I have my thoughts.
yeah.
Obviously, the economy is weighing heavily, but what else beyond the obvious economy is causing this kind of hold on hiring, or are you seeing that in the medical industry?
Last year was amazing, a great year. Um, and there was steady hiring, and it was sort of still in the post-pandemic kind
Mm-hmm.
of craze of, hey, we cut back on staff probably too much, and there was kind of a catch up rebuilding the teams to really enable growth. And so that uh, finally hit a wall, I think, really in January. I had a couple of CEO and a CCO that I closed in like January, February, and then it was pretty dull, pretty flat. And and the thing that I keep hearing, because I continue to talk to people on, board members and CEOs about positions, and it's just like, hey, wait until we raise this next round.
Yep.
And if you've been following the economy and the inflation, which we all experience, you can see that that makes money really expensive. And so right now, it's really hard for startups, and that's the space I work in. I work in kind of the
Mhm.
early pre-revenue to about 100 million, and most of them on the smaller end of the scale. And so they're all dependent upon outside funding. And so that just means that right now everybody's kind of in a pat hand. They can't really do much. They'd like to add, they'd like to upgrade, they'd like to do some things that help stimulate some growth for the company, but they're having to make do right now with what they have, just because the cost of money is so great. I was at the LSI conference last March in Dana Point. I don't know if you've been to that,
Yep.
but great
I want to
conference.
hear about that, by the way, because they're trying to get me to go to it next year because I obviously live near Dana Point, but the price tag for that is
I
pretty
know,
hefty.
I know,
So
but
I'd love
I'll
to get
tell
your
you,
your feedback on
it's
that.
worth it.
Is
It's
it?
worth it. Yeah, it's a great conference. In fact, what I experienced this last year or this year at the LSI conference was reminiscent to '09, '08, where typically you go to these conferences and you'll see the VCs and the PE firm representatives get up and really espouse all the reasons why you should let them, give you their money, or, let them invest, take their money, because of these reasons that they bring this strategic value and they do this and this and this. This year it was just like it was after the big crash in the market,
Yeah.
where now they're in a very different posture. The posture is, hey, listen, we're going to hold on to our money for protecting our portfolio companies, but if you've got a really killer deal, I'm talking fire sale,
Yeah.
come talk to us. So it's that venture capital that turned into vulture capital. And so very different vibe. It was really not that fun for a lot of companies that are out there with hat in hand trying to raise capital.
Money's not cheap right now. And so everyone's kind of keeping purse strings close, right? And being really selective on where they are investing. And let me just touch on that really quick because that is a common conversation with me and clients or even prospective clients for Tribe, one, I would say it's kind of this like sweet spot of timing. When you can't hire direct marketing or salespeople, and you're really just having to take the money you have raised and apply it to product dev and any kind of upstream strategy, you're really trying to be choosy on where you're investing money. And that is a consultant's dream because you don't have to put me on your payroll. I'm on retainer, I'm temporary. You run out of money or you have a rough month, you don't have to pay me, right? And so I'm month to month. And oftentimes that really works for someone that can't afford to bring someone on with benefits and can't afford to bring them on in the payroll that I would require, right? But you get access to me and our consultants on our team at what I think is a bargain basement price. We have massive pedigrees of experience that you couldn't afford if you were bringing us on full time. And so what I always look at is this is a great opportunity. If you can't hire and maybe you're on a freeze in any industry, it's the perfect time to invest in consultants that have backgrounds in your space because you're essentially getting a full-time equivalent without having that overhead. That's just like a little plug for Tribe. But
no, that's
on
good.
that, I also have conversations with the clients around, okay, if money's tight and you are constantly in fundraising mode, what is more important than your investor pitch deck? And let me look at that. I've actually offered to audit a couple of prospects that I've talked to their pitch deck, and we take it apart. We unpack it. They're not all bad. They're definitely a good start, but they're not marketing people. They're engineers for the most part, or a doctor who had a great idea. And so we start with that pitch deck and we help them really refine what they want to be best known for. What is the brand that's coming through in their investor pitch deck? And if I'm an investor in the room, what's the total addressable market? Why should I pick you over another guy? What do you do differently or more unique than the other person that has the same solution? So it's all of those things that we help them really get down to the brass tacks on what's going to get them paid, meaning someone's going to invest in them. Right. So that's like everything you just described around this med tech world right now. I think it applies to all industries, but I would say, boomeranging the question back to you before we move on, I'm a fan of pivoting when necessary. Instead of just waiting for things to kind of either change on their own or on the hope strategy, I'm hoping that this is going to get better. You as a recruiter, and you'd said that things kind of stalled out in January, and your primary target audience where you get your business is kind of in this holding pattern. What have you guys done differently, or how are you approaching this market in kind of a pivot perspective?
Good question. I would say that at times when we're really busy just executing searches, we don't have a lot of time to get in and do some of the behavioral assessment, team development, and things like that, which we've begun doing. Because if they're in a holding pattern, there's always going to be underperformers and people who just need a little bit of a leg up and need to be coached. And so a lot of smaller companies, they don't have the tools that the bigger companies have to really develop people. And so it's very common for people in little companies and startups to feel undervalued and under-resourced. And so we've been long, advocating for you as a manager, whatever level, you've got to develop your people or you're going to lose them. And
Amen to that.
And so this whole concept of, fine, if you're not hiring right now, let us help you. So let us help you in a variety of ways to sort of take what you have and let's try to elevate the game. And then if there are people who just can't quite make that transition, then that's the point, and we can enter in and conduct a search.
Swap them out. Listen, that is a brilliant pivot for your space. I was really curious to see how you were going to answer that question. That is brilliant. That's exactly what everyone that's successful in pivoting when there are headwinds has to do. They have to look at something that's tangential to their business, or it's a dotted line. So it's not totally out of scope, but it's something that's tangential, that's also complementary to the need. But you're not just completely taking yourself out of the game. And I completely agree with you. If you can't hire, make what you've got better. and
Right.
or find out who's anchoring your team and swap them out. Now, the risk, and this isn't really on topic for this podcast, but the risk that I always had as a sales manager is in times where there's a hiring freeze or they're not advocating hiring new people. If you kick someone to the curb or you remove them from their head count, they may close that head, right?
Yeah, I
So
think that's
buyer
a fun,
beware on
yeah.
that.
I think that's a function of larger companies, though. I
Okay.
don't think the smaller companies have that same,
Luxury.
they're not counting heads.
Okay.
Everybody, as you know, in a startup, especially on the commercial side, is a MVP. You really need
Right.
every person. There's not optional people. And so the bigger companies, that's why in a bigger company, you see these significant layoffs, like a
Yeah.
J&J or a Medtronic. I mean, they'll let thousands go. And
Yep.
so you kind of wonder, well, if they can do without that, why were they there in the first place?
Before we get too far down our podcast today, let's talk about how we even know each other. Because it's actually kind of interesting. And I've been thinking about this conversation as I normally do. I start thinking about the guests that I'm going to have on and kind of just dissecting threads of conversation that I want to engage in, and even just like the dynamic of that person. And I was thinking, you know what Drue is? Drue is the ultimate networker. Because honestly, I worked at some crappy little startup back then. I was in my 20s. It was my first manager job. And you and I connected originally as a recruiter and a manager that was hiring. And we engaged on quite a few candidates. We were, prior to recording this, talking about some of the people that we hired mutually together. And I'm wondering what's happening with all of those people. So if you're one of those people and listening, and Drue was your recruiter and I was your manager, hey. But my point is, you are the ultimate networker, because, and I think there's huge value in that. And I'm actually trying to take a page out of your playbook for my new position, because consulting is all about your network and about being best known in your industry. But I would say it would have been so easy. I can rattle off so many other recruiters I worked with during that time. And it would have been so easy when I left cardio, our relationship could have just easily ended, right? But you always maintained that contact, and I tried to as well. And I would refer people to you and vice versa. And then I don't know if you even remember, but maybe a year ago when I was still working at big corporate, you had pitched me to a startup, which, by the way, I need to get the contact information for them because they might need brand strategy.
Yeah.
But and I thought, oh my God, that is so awesome that Drue, literally, we probably hadn't talked for a year or two, maybe more. And out of the blue, I pop up in your head, hey, you should call her. And they called me and we had a conversation. Ultimately, I wasn't ready to make a move at that point, but that just says a lot about you and just how you engage with your network. And I think people undervalue maintaining relationships, especially in an incestuous industry like medtech. I think all industries are somewhat incestuous, but this one, I feel like I've either interviewed you or managed you at some point in your career. Like, we all overlap, right? But
Mhm.
anyway, I just wanted to talk through. I've known Drue since I was probably
Don't give a number.
25.
Don't give a number. Because I'm going to say how long ago it was, and they'll be able to do the math in
I
their
don't
head.
care. I honestly could care less. I don't care. If I'm not getting older, then I'm dying. So
Yeah,
I'd
no, that's true.
prefer to get
Yeah,
older. But
yeah,
yes, so we've known each other a long time.
yeah.
And I asked Drue to be on this podcast because I do feel not an obligation. I don't live my life like that, but I feel like I want to pay it forward to Drue, because what people probably don't know is behind the scenes, when I was somewhat disenchanted with corporate USA and I was starting to think about, like, what am I here for? The whole pontificating life and what my purpose was, and kind of feeling like I wasn't being challenged anymore. And I did feel like I had other things I wanted to achieve in my life. I reached out to Drue, one, to just kind of understand the tides, because I hadn't really looked up in over a decade. So I hadn't really been considering alternatives, but I really just wanted to get his sage advice, which I would highly recommend. He's very well spoken and really understands this market. But I did call him, and you're a dad, so I can totally tell this was like fatherly advice. I think we're probably the same age, but you had said like, Steph, why would you go hop to another company? I may not get it entirely right. I remember I was on a walk when we were talking and you're like,
Mhm.
why would you do that? You've got so much of a track record. You've worked for some big companies and some startups and some great technology. Why would you not take all of that insight and wisdom and experience and roll it up into your own business? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that, and I had all the reasons why that just wasn't an option. And you deny it, but you really were, I would say, significantly pivotal in my reason to hop out of corporate and to launch Tribe. You and then the person that you had introduced me to, which was Matthew Scott, you two really had an impact on me making that decision and feeling comfortable with it. And I think you had said I wish we would have recorded that call because it was a great call. I think you had said something like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You could fail. You can always go work for some big corporate company again. And I kind of took that with me. And then after talking to Matthew, who does this in a similar way, but in a different industry or different specialty, I guess, I just thought, you know what? They're right. I'm going to go for it. And so, anyway, I just wanted to have you on because one, you're brilliant. Two, you're an excellent networker. And I think networking is where it's at, especially in this space where it's really tough to get a job or to get promoted or any of the things that are normally organic to a career. So it's really important to keep the people that have impacted you close and continue to have conversations with them because you just never know what that conversation will reveal within yourself. And my other just like big aha is, go for it. Drew, I don't know why it took you telling me that, Drew, but it
Yeah.
did. And I've never been regretful of that decision and I will never go back. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Once you taste that, thank you for that compliment. And once you taste that freedom, that autonomy to really chart
Mhm.
your own course, I think it's really hard. I could never go back. Uh,
No chance.
and
No chance.
and you are an inspiration because you've done it, and you've now done. I mean, I think you've accomplished more than I even expected you to. You even whatever seed I planted, you grew it to something even more than I could have thought. And it's because I just planted the seed and you grew an idea. And that idea has now come to fruition. So it's gratifying for me to see. And I'd love to learn more about kind of what you're building because it's more than meets the eye. I can tell just by talking to you and the time that we've spent today.
Well, one, I want to affirm you because the best trait of a leader is planting a seed and letting someone else build it. So obviously, you're a natural born leader because if you plant a seed and then have to do all the farming for someone, that's not really leadership. That's a very tight micromanagement. But if you lead someone, you inspire them to find the best in themselves and then they run with it. And you're just giving them that innate confidence that maybe is just under the radar or it's just simmering and you really bring it out of them. So anyway, I just wanted to affirm you and tell you thank you for that because like you're right. I will not because I have any regrets about corporate USA. Trust me, corporate USA is where I got all my experience. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have anything to offer a client if I didn't have that experience. And then
Yeah.
financially, it put me in a really good position where I could make those decisions without fear, right? So, zero regrets. It was my path. But what I'm trying to do now is inspire others that may feel stuck or they may feel like they have more to offer, or they just want to flex a new muscle or charge a new neuron in your brain.
Mhm.
That you can do it. You've got to get wisdom from those in front of you. Like you sent me to Matthew Scott. We had great conversation. He was so graceful to even provide me that context. So, you'd have to find the right people. Little plug, I am building a 30-day entrepreneur course that I'm about to launch. I'm really excited about it because kind of like we were talking about earlier on getting asked how you break into medtech. The second I left corporate and started Tribe within 30 days, you know how many people reached out to me, both former colleagues of mine, but even people I've known from way back when. Some were cardio people. How did you do this? Why did you do this? How can I do this? I'm thinking the same thing. I want to do this. So I just decided, you know what, instead of having multiple conversations that were, hour to 2 hours at a time, let me just throw this all in a course. And I literally took my entire calendar for the first 30 days after I left big corporate and started Tribe. And I have it in the course. Like, this is what you should do week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. That course is really just about how do you get a business upright and able to take clients. And I was able to do it in 30 days. Most people think I was honeymooning or doing something behind the scenes. Drue knows I wasn't. I literally left one and it was a very clean break and started the next day. So I think it can be done, but you have to be really passionate about what you're doing and you have to drive yourself to do it. No one's driving you.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just wanted to give a little shout out. That was kind of born out of necessity.
I love that. And what you've done is, a lot of people will do something and then they don't sort of show people how they got there. And there's great value in sort of that roadmap or the rungs in the ladder that you can help people with. So I think, number one, it takes a ton of courage to step out and without a net and do something on your own. And it's not for the faint of heart.
Nope.
It takes a belief in yourself and a certain level of just confidence, but also passion and belief in a future state of something that you want to build.
One of the threads that I wanted to talk to you about, which I know we also spoke about that day on that call that led to my decision, but one of the other things that's been really freeing is I'm not capped. I'm kind of this like high-strung person. I know that's really shocking to you, but I like to do more than what's expected of me. And in the old school days of corporate, that was honored with money. And I'm all about money and purpose. I could kind of trade one or the other, but it's got to be purposeful or it's got to have money attached to it. If it's neither of those things, I'm not interested. And so when you go into this kind of entrepreneurial state, there's no cap. I can make as much as I want, right? As much as I'm willing to put in. So if I want to burn 80 hours a week investing in Tribe, I can do that. And every single ounce of that effort goes to my bottom line. Except for, like you said, if you get to the Starling curve, well, it starts to flatten out because you're not doing anything well. So you really have to balance that. But where it got kind of demotivating to me is, I'd say post-pandemic, just culture in general, not any one company, because my husband also, him and I have had long conversations around this, or even a ton of my friends that don't even work in my industry. We noticed that there was like a softening in this like winner effort spirit. And you and I had talked about, it's meritocracy. And Drue and I also talked about one of us needs to write a book on who killed meritocracy, because
I nominate you.
If you're what?
I nominate you.
Well, you're already an author, so I feel like you're more prepared to do it.
Hardly.
Okay. Well, we could figure out who's going to write it, but someone needs to talk about the climate of, and I have 3 boys. And so it's really important for me to raise them to want to win. It's okay to want to win, and it's okay to be competitive. I mean, if you're so crazy about winning that you'll cut costs or you'll cut, decisions that are not good to your character, then that's a whole different conversation. But I will literally, if anyone's listening that was my former manager, I will break through brick walls to get to the goal if there's money on the other side. And you want people like that. You want people that are spirited, that have energy to do things that you're not asking them to do to get to the goal or to exceed the goal. And I think that honestly started with Rhonda, who you and I have as a mutual friend. Anytime I would hit my quota, this is like back when I was in my early 20s, when I would hit my quota, I'd call her, ready to go to happy hour. And she'd say, great, go get one more. Always. It was never satisfied at quota. And so I just kind of got conditioned that quota is just the minimum. That's just what's expected to pay the bills and your return on their investment. But if you're not inspired by that, that's okay. But maybe sales isn't the right job for you. Right. Maybe you're more of a cubicle kind of person, and maybe you're comfortable with just getting a flat base salary and you're not a commission-based employee. But the topic that I want to talk to you about is this meritocracy conversation, because if you are a commission-based employee, you should absolutely hire the guns. You should hire people that respectfully can bust through walls for your business. And you should honor them with commission, and you should honor them with opportunity. And I think Drue and I were having this conversation, I don't know, 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. I guess it was over a year ago, that, who killed meritocracy? Like, why is it bad to want to win? And why is it bad to hire overachievers that actually want to compete? And why are we being complacent on people that are not delivering? I saw this kind of heavy neutral of whether I worked twice as hard or I delivered twice as much, not always a total direct correlation to working twice as hard, but maybe just working smarter, right? Why is that just as good as someone that's just mailing it in and doing the bare minimum? That's super defeating and demotivating to someone that gets paid to win. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? I know you
Yeah.
deal with a lot of startups and a lot of reps. And so what are your thoughts?
A couple of things. I think that our culture has gone through a little bit of a transformation where we used to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate winners. Now we celebrate victims. And so what's
Yep.
happened in the culture of a company is, you can't reward people for doing really well because you're leaving out the kind of the other people. And
Someone
and I
else will
think
get their
it's
feelings hurt.
right. It's about feelings. And so companies are beginning to suffer who have implemented some of these new strategies. But I'm a firm believer that there is a bell curve of talent in every industry. You've seen it. You've seen the surgeons who are at the
Mm-hmm.
top end of the bell curve, the fat part, the average, and then you've seen the surgeons
Yep.
that aren't so great. And that's nice that they can use a robot. Hopefully that improves their tactile capabilities. But even in any role, so if you're in a marketing role or R&D or quality, whatever, sales, you're still going to find the same reality that there's a bell curve, which means that at the end of the bell curve are the talented, really exceptional people. And so
Mm-hmm.
what makes sense to me is if I'm going to have a company, I want it to grow and I want it to build. I don't want it to just stay constant and stagnant. So in order to take my companies to that level, I have to attract the best. In order to attract the best, that means that how we construct our compensation and how we reward success, as you put, have to be congruent with what makes that attractive to them. And I think far too many companies just accept mediocrity, and it's part of their DNA. If you look at, there's some companies out there, like in the orthopedic industry, I think you can look at Stryker as kind of the company that has their primary objective hiring talent. And by
Yes,
talent,
almost to a fault. I mean, I've heard
there's
about their
no
national
question.
sales meetings.
It's a bit much. So I was there 24 plus years ago, and it was a lot of fun. It was before it reached the scale it is today, but still, they're very disciplined in their hiring, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a very concrete hiring criteria, and that's why, to your point, you probably hear that there's a lot of athletes, a lot of football players,
Yep.
it's like a fraternity. Well, that's because
Yep.
competition. They want people who are
They're
competitive,
competitive.
and
Yeah.
they'll take I mean, they have a lot of female athletes, but the athlete is one of the things they want. They want people who want to win. And that's to your point. If you're just happy finishing somewhere in the middle of the pack, I mean,
I don't
that's
want them.
great. That's great. But do you want them on your team?
I don't. Tribe, I look for subject matter experts that honestly bring the value of any client up, right? We don't want to just match spades with what they already know. We want to level up. And that's important to me, but it may not be important to everyone. And I think what you had said earlier, it is a strategy that some of these bigger companies have enlisted post pandemic when triggers and feelings were a priority. And what's happened is they failed. That's
Mhm.
probably also why we're in a decline in the economy, because soft doesn't finish, right? And
Right.
so it looks good on paper. The optics are amazing, right? We've
Yeah.
hired all these people with feelings and triggers, and that's great. But did they hit their quota or exceed quota, or did they add value to your company? Probably not. So I do think there needs to be a mix of people. You don't want all hard charging, crazy people. You want a balance, because that's how you build a great team dynamic. Any team I've ever led, I've had the person that would get it done in their sleep. I've had the people that literally would step into anyone's territory and backfill them if they were on maternity leave. You have to kind of have all the cogs in the wheel to complete the circle. But I also think you can't just go with just filling bodies and not really any motivation to get it done. And I do think it's generational too, which is unfortunate
Mm-hmm.
that that's kind of become the expectation that and I've had this on a different podcast, right? I know I've said this before, but you shouldn't expect your income. The income you have to
Mm-hmm.
earn, right?
Absolutely.
It's not
Yeah.
just about showing up, because everyone talks on TikTok and all the other things about how horrible their life is. Then get a new job. If your
Right.
life sucks or your job sucks, get a new job. Or
Yeah.
like Candace Owens says, get a helmet.
Right.
Because
Look in the mirror. I mean, you are the master of your own, domain.
right. Yeah. So either fix it. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I think one of the things I say in the 30-day entrepreneur is, if you're finding yourself getting anxiety or hangxiety on Sundays and you're lamenting going to work on Monday, it's probably time to look in the mirror and figure out, are you doing what you want to be doing? Or are you doing what brings you passion or joy? Or
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just you're the problem, like maybe you need a reset on yourself and how you're approaching life, right? All of those things could
Yeah.
apply, but I
Yeah.
think it's on you to find the right solution instead of just bringing that junk to work every Monday and
Mm-hmm.
making it everyone else's problem. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
off my soapbox, but let's not kill meritocracy.
Yeah. No kidding.
Let's continue to inspire that in our children and in college students. I mean, they just went and spent a heavy debt getting a
Mm-hmm.
college education. Let's let them use it in a way that actually brings value. So
Yeah.
I just think that's a topic that obviously is near and dear to our hearts, but
Sure.
it's also something that just needs to be discussed. And I
Yeah.
know that this podcast is around leadership, and that is leadership in its core. Is you want to identify what makes people tick and what they're motivated by, and then bring that out in them. And if they're
That's right.
not motivated by anything, then guess what? You're their leader. You need to help them find out what they're passionate about, or maybe even things they don't realize they're really good at. Plant the seed and let them grow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're about to wrap up. I have a couple other questions for you. I'm a big fan of mentors. I've had great mentors my entire career. I think everyone should have them at a young age. Who would you want to honor as a mentor in your life, and why?
Mine was a gentleman named Larry Roberts, who was actually taught a class at the church that I attended for 20 years. Just a very wise man. He was a conference speaker, was really with integrity systems. So if you've gone through that, I went through the integrity coaching module there. Just a guy who really understood the value of balancing your personal with your professional and making sure that your priorities are right, because you can go headlong in a career and leave carnage at home, and you get to the end of your life. And as Lee
And you're
Iacocca
like, where'd it
said,
go?
nobody
Yeah.
says on their deathbed, I wish I spent more time at the office. So
Nope.
really a matter of, placing your priorities in the correct order. And you have the ability to have a balanced life and a happy home. And, we today have 10 grandkids, 4 kids out there married and doing great because of that balance that he helped me maintain.
Next question. Superpower. Everyone has them. Everyone tries to tell me they don't, but everyone does. If you're being honest with yourself, what comes naturally to you, and what do people call you for advice?
Different advice than superpower. I think the advice everybody seeks is relative to their career, which for obvious reasons they would call me.
Okay.
Um,
Right.
but if you ask me what my superpower, it's really a strength, and it's also my greatest weakness, and that is empathy. I have a
Mm.
lot of empathy, far more than I care to have. But I think it enables people to feel comfortable calling me. I do a lot of therapy for executives that I place, because it's hard, as you can imagine. You're leaving a company, you're joining a new company in a senior role. Who can you really vent to. You can't go back to your colleagues from the old company and vent that with them. You can't really talk to, it's lonely at the top. So if you're a CEO or a VP, I tend to be the outlet for a lot of that. So, so that would be how I would sort of classify my superpower, which cuts both ways.
And then the last question before I let you go on this very hot day in Arizona is favorite business book.
There's a lot. And I audible, I feel guilty when I say I read when I really listened, but I audible.
Yeah, that's
constantly.
fine. You're still getting the content.
But I will say this, most of the books are really great and you can take stuff from them, and there's some practical application you can pull from them. And mostly it's about mindset, I think. But the most practical book that I go back to a lot, because again, working with smaller companies, and a lot of times they're growing fast, they're adding headcount. So the dynamics are changing and they're difficult. And I think that going back to Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is still one that for many years I keep going back to, because the same problems seem to happen in kind of a serial manner in all these different companies. And I feel like that's just the most practical. To take it to the next level, his book, The Advantage, I think sort of encapsulates a broader view of building an organization and a culture. But that specific book, I think, just helps. If people will receive it, it'll help them really kind of fix some of that dysfunction.
I completely agree with you. Intuitive was a big fan of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and was referenced often through my leadership career there. So I'm a big fan of that book as well. But I like your perspective that it really helps people frame up how they're going to approach circumstances. I mean, the one for me that kind of like how you position 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's an oldie but goodie, and it's still relevant to this day. I wish they would actually do an update on it just to like bring it to 2023. But 1 Minute Manager, if I were a brand new manager, I would highly recommend that book. It's so simple, yet simplicity is actually what gets it done. And that sandwich perspective of a praise, then the reprimand, and then another praise, like putting it all together, that's the greatest way to approach a tough conversation. And there's so much value in that. So I like the old school books that are still relevant to this day. That means you wrote a really good book.
Yeah, and I'll share something. I've been asked this question before, just about, here I am a recruiter. That means I poach people out of companies. The hardest people to recruit, the ones I cannot recruit, irrespective of how great the opportunity is, are the people who are being developed and coached by their superior. Those people, they're just, there's a loyalty and a gratitude and an unfinished nature to what is being wrought in them, so that, it's the people who are just kind of, not experiencing that kind of a relationship and empowerment. So, that's something that people need to think about.
That is so profound. That's an episode 2 waiting to happen, because I have so much going on in my brain that I want to comment on that. But I know we're wrapping up this Leadr podcast, so I want to finish on that. But I completely agree with you. If you know that person it's the Maya Angelou conversation about people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. If you're invested in your employees and they know that you're invested in them for the right reasons, not to just hit a number, but you legitimately want them to succeed, they would literally go anywhere for you. They would do anything. They would go anywhere. And that's not lost on me. And I definitely think great leaders understand that and make it about the people and not about just the business that needs to be done. So, Drue, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Taking the time. Is this your first podcast?
No.
Dang it. Well, it's okay. I am thrilled to have you on Leadr podcast, and we'll continue conversations around all the things we didn't have time to unpack today. But thank you again. I hope that you stay cool in Arizona, and until next time.
Of course. Thank you.